Hi, welcome to Real Film Snobs. I'm Angela Yeager. We have a special guest host this week, Mr. Brad Wartman. Brad, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Angela. I really appreciate being here, and I'm looking forward to giving a fine performance in Brian's stead.
Good, good. I don't know, Brian's hard shoes to fill, but he couldn't be with us tonight. He is on the train from Snowpiercer and hanging out with Tilda Swinton and all those fine folks on the Snowpiercer train tonight. So our first movie this week is Their Finest, and you saw a clip at the top of the show for that. And in the movie, a receptionist is hired to write a screenplay to help the British war effort during World War II, and she finds herself sparring with and then becoming romantically interested in her fellow screenwriter, played by Sam Claflin, and the actress Gemma Arterton plays the receptionist / female screenwriter, and she's brought in, of course, in the film to do what they call in the movie, write the slop. That's
right.
What they call it, so affectionately, for the women's dialogue, to bring in the women's perspective into the movie, because of course it was World War II, and that's a lot of who was going to the movie, so they needed the woman's perspective in the movie. And Bill Nighy, of course, a great British comedic actor, does a fine turn here as an egotistical actor, which of course actors love to play actors, and so he has a great time chewing up the scenery. And the film is directed by Lone Scherfig, a Danish female director who previously did An Education, which is a great movie, and she also did Italian for Beginners, another really good movie. So she's racked up quite an accomplishment here. So I'm really curious to hear what you thought of this. This movie actually surprised me a little bit. I actually expected it to be pretty predictable and a little dull, to be honest, based on the trailer. I thought, oh, okay, kind of cutesy World War II farce, and but it's got a few twists in there, and it's
right.
Not as sentimental as I actually thought. It's a little harder edge than I was expecting, and I really like this actress, Gemma Arterton. She's in another movie that came out this year, another British film. It's a zombie movie called The Girl with All the Gifts, which Brian and I are going to be reviewing this summer as part of her Fresh Pick segment.
Oh.
But she's a really, really good actress, really interesting to watch, and gives a fine performance here.
Right. I remember Gemma from her performance in Byzantium.
Oh, yeah,
a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed the film too. The part that I focused on first was the cinematography. Just some beautiful cinematography they've done, and trying to show the environment that people were living in at the time of the Blitz in England. And so so first of all, it was the cinematography. The second kind of thing I focused in on was the how do I put this? Kind of the transient nature that these people were living during the entire movie, because you would never know from one moment to the next whether you were going to be alive or dead, or somebody you knew would be alive or dead. And so that really weighed heavily, I think, into the feature. And as you were saying, that so the film is about this woman who comes in and she comes in thinking she's going to be a secretary, and she comes in and then is working as a screenwriter.
Right.
And so the difference, so they shoot this feature film, and they go to Cornwall. I think, is it Cornwall?
I think so. I'm not sure exactly.
To
somewhere
shoot
on pretty location, on the shore. Yeah.
On location. But it's such a difference between living in London and being in Cornwall.
Right, it's like a little vacation for them.
Yeah.
Kind of relax, but it's also melancholy because so much of the city is destroyed. And it is interesting how they show these people during a really horrific wartime just going about their business in a way. They have to, like, life has to keep going on. So they're still going to work, and she has to step over. I mean, just imagine, like, on your way to work and you have to step over piles of rubble because the building next door to your office building has literally been destroyed. Or people that you once worked with don't show up that day because, they didn't make it through the night or whatever.
There's one scene in the movie where she's walking out of a bomb shelter, and another woman is right in front of her, and a bomb falls, and she's freaked out because she sees nothing but bodies around her.
Right.
And then it turns out that they're mannequins.
Right, from a store
From
nearby.
a store, until she walks up and then sees the woman who was just literally steps in front of her is dead.
Yeah. No, it's
And so-
definitely got, that's was the part that I thought of the movie that was a lot more poignant than I was expecting. And it has, you know, sort of what I was expecting, sort of the daffy English characters, the Bill Nye providing comedic relief. Sam Claflin is her, you know, love interest in the film. And the kind of the love story part of it, I thought was actually one of the weakest parts. I mean, their kind of sparring was good, but you know, her husband, you know, it was sort of obvious from the beginning this guy was a loser, and she's probably not going to stay with him. I mean, I'm not giving anything away. It's like, if you've never seen a movie in your life, that will be the only way you're going to be surprised by what happens, because it's sort of obvious that this is not a great relationship for her, and that she's probably going to be moving on. But you know, the period detail, this is a director who did An Education, and that was also a period piece set in the 60s in that case, and she seems to have a real eye for that kind of thing, because I felt like the period detail was really, really good. So.
Yeah, and I guess just in closing, I really thought this was kind of Bill Nye's movie. You know, he did an actor portraying an actor.
Oh yeah, he
in
was
kind
totally
of a
chewing the
comedic
scenery.
Yeah, he was all over that.
Yeah, very egotistical, but he has some sympathetic parts as well. So how many stars are you giving the movie, Brad?
I'm going to give it a 3.
Yes, that's how much I'm giving it. Very good. You're on the right track. No, just kidding. Agreeing with me already. That's the right track. Okay.
Right. So our next film is The Lost City of Z, and we have a clip for you. So Lost City of Z is a film about a man named Percy Fawcett, who goes to Peru to do
Or is it Bolivia?
Bolivia, yes,
Bolivia,
thank you,
yes.
at the behest of the National Geographic Society to do a survey of a river, and as part of a boundary dispute between, I think, Peru and Bolivia, and as he's going through that search, he comes across several artifacts, archaeological artifacts, some pots and stuff that were heretofore unknown. And at the time, this is set in the early 1900s, was kind of a period of exploration for a lot of British and Norwegian people who were exploring the Arctic, Antarctica, but nobody had really been exploring the jungle too much. And so the Fawcett's contribution turned out to be a series of trips back to this area of the jungle, trying to find the city that was associated with all this archaeological information, and to prove to the British Royal Societies that there was actually an intelligent civilization that lived in the jungle, because at that point, up to that point, people thought of the jungle as just full of primitives who couldn't do anything. And so he went back repeatedly to find that. But it's kind of an interesting story, because it transitions through a period of time when he was in World War I, for instance, and this is a true story. He was in World War I, and he was gone for years at a time. And it explores not only his exploration work, but also his work with in the participation in the war, and the effect on his family life with his wife and children. So,
Yeah.
How about you?
You're ready to be done now. So the film, I can't remember if you mentioned this, but it's directed by James Gray. And James Gray is an interesting director. He started off his career doing movies like The Yards, We Own the Night, you know, much more kind of like grittier American dramas. And then in the past couple of movies, he did The Immigrant, for instance, with Marion Cotillard, which was a little bit more in this vein, in that it was more of an epic, like a period epic. And this film is very much sort of an old-fashioned adventure tale in some parts, but with more of a modern twist, I would say. And by a modern twist, I mean, you know, we've seen these kind of movies before where the white man goes to explore the jungle. Werner Herzog made a whole career practically off doing these movies with Klaus Kinski. But those were always very much from the perspective of, of the white man and taming the quote unquote savages, not my language, but the kind of language they would have used in those older films. This is, more of that type of film for the modern age. The character that Charlie Hunnam plays of Fawcett is a more enlightened type of man, and he is convinced that that the people, as you mentioned, in the Amazon are actually quite intelligent, quite sophisticated, and that he's trying to prove that their civilization predates Europe, to which the Europeans, of course, are really not happy about that. The film also stars Sienna Miller as his wife. Again, I've criticized her before on the show. She's a okay actress, but she just manages to always be forgettable, in my opinion, in every movie she's in. And Robert Pattinson as his sort of explorer that he takes with him,
right.
who has some experience in the Amazon. I think that's the reason he comes with him the first time, because
right.
he has some experience down in that area. This film, I didn't know what to think of it, because it is sort of the type of movie people don't make anymore. And there was a movie on my top 10 last year called Embrace of the Serpent, which I'm not sure if you saw or not. It didn't show hardly in any theaters compared to Lost City of Z, and that was a movie about colonialism and exploration of the Amazon, but told from the perspective of indigenous people. And I just think it's a fabulous movie. So it was almost hard for me to watch this movie, having seen that, because that movie's like this one in reverse.
Yeah.
But I did actually enjoy this movie, and I am going to recommend it. Yeah. I thought the lead actor, Charlie Hunnam, who I know was a big deal a few years ago on some TV show, Sons of Anarchy.
Son of Anarchy. Yeah.
And I never saw it. Have you watched this?
Nope.
I thought maybe you would. Aren't you kind of a motorcycle guy? Sort of?
Could be.
You could be, yeah. I thought maybe you had watched it. That he was sort of a big deal. He was supposed to be the next hot thing when he was going to do 50 Shades of Grey,
yeah.
and then he dropped out, which I think was actually probably a smart career move. And he's really good. And it's funny that as I was watching the movie, I kept thinking, he reminds me of kind of a mid-period Brad Pitt, like Fight Club period Brad Pitt. I kept thinking that as I was watching it. And at the end of the movie, it said executive produced by Brad Pitt, and it kind of made me chuckle. But I did enjoy it. It's a good adventure tale. It kept me interested throughout. Cinematography, I thought, was very good. You mentioned that in the previous film. Also with this one, you really feel like you're in the Amazon with them.
Yeah. It doesn't have quite the feel of like Aguirre, The Wrath of God, or Fitzcarraldo.
It's not weird enough. It doesn't get that sense of, those films get this sort of kind of almost psychedelic, psychological, like the way the heat affects the brain of the folks that are not native to the area. And this one, you see people being sick and not doing, but it's not.
Or eaten by piranhas.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's not that kind of
yeah.
exploration. It's not trying to be Herzogian and showing how horrible and cruel nature is to man. So,
no, it's great. I would give it, again, I think I would give it like a 3 out of 4.
Yeah, so it's a 3-star film for you.
Yep.
So I'm curious though, because you mentioned all these periods, and at first when they go into the World War I period, it almost was a little jolting, because he'd been in I thought this was going to be a movie. I thought the movie was about his exploits in the jungle, and then all of a sudden it's a movie about, now he's in World War I and things are happening. Right. And then it's sort of him back at home trying to settle in, and then this conflict he has with his family, his sons, who feel like he has 2 sons and eventually a daughter, but the daughter's barely mentioned in the movie or shown, that feel a little bit like their father has been missing their whole lives, because he disappears for years at a time when he's down in the Amazon.
Yeah, and I think that's something important to remember, is at that time, for instance, Ernest Shackleton was exploring Antarctica, and he literally missed most of World War I and never knew about it because he was in Antarctica at the time. We probably need to move on.
Okay. Is Rocky giving us the sign? Apparently he is. Okay.
So our next film is Night Shift, 1982 film directed by Ron Howard, starring Henry Winkler, Michael Keaton, and Shelley Long. And it's the story of Henry Winkler plays the part of a county mortician who is given a new partner in the form of Bill Blazkowski, who's played by Michael Keaton. And I knew this would be a good film when I first saw that one of the writers on the film was named Babalu Mandel. Now, any film that has Babalu in it is a film to be watched. and I got to say, this was, I think this was probably one of Michael Keaton's best films. He plays the part of Blaze up to the top and beyond. And if, 2 scenes, a scene that is most memorable for me was, that you should watch, is one where he defines the word prostitution. And the reason why he does that is because Henry Winkler ends up being next door to a woman who's played by Shelley Long, and she is a prostitute whose pimp is killed. And Billy, or Blaze, decides that he has the idea that they should start up the prostitution ring in the moratorium and use the hearse for transport and whatnot. And so the whole story goes around where they're trying to, they have this whole thing going on with prostitution, and the scene where Keaton defines the word prostitution is really one that's pretty memorable. I mean, it's probably not a great script, but it's just a really, really funny movie, and I really enjoyed it.
This is a movie, 1982. This is the kind of R-rated comedy that they don't make a lot of anymore. I feel like it's a very 80s thing, and I mean that in a good way. I think they make R-rated comedies now, but they're often more like high concept. This is really sort of like these guys or these characters are very specific to their characters. They're not like archetypes per se. I mean, sort of like Henry Winkler's kind of the nerdy, quiet one, which you wouldn't think. It was also against casting, because this is like the Fonz, right, playing kind of a nerdy, quiet, withdrawn guy. And then Michael Keaton comes in. This was his first big major starring role. I think he'd been in some other films, but this was his first big role, right?
And the big ones, and the ones that followed, like Mr. Mom, Gung Ho.
Yeah, then he got bigger and bigger after this. But you could see why the studios would see this and think, oh, this guy has something. Because it's one of those moments in cinema where someone just comes on and like kind of takes the movie. I mean, Shelley Long is good in it, Henry Winkler is good, but this is really Michael Keaton's movie, in my opinion. He just takes this control of this movie and just goes full on. And Shelley Long is such a great comedic actress too. She was one of these people, I never understood why she didn't get more. She was in a lot of movies in the 80s, and then just sort of, of course, Cheers, but didn't get enough credit as a comedic actress. Yeah, she was in a lot of good, good comedies. I mean, not maybe amazing classics, but good movies. And this one, we actually watched it at your place, and we had a fun little our little our crew had our event at your house, and we watched this movie, and I'd never seen it before, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm not a big Ron Howard fan, and I actually might think this is one of my favorite films of his, because it lacks pretension. Like he became one of these directors that tried to just do serious movies, and I kind of almost felt like he should go back to doing stuff like this, because this is probably one of his, it felt like a lighter touch than you expect from him. So.
My last word on the movie is love brokers.
Love brokers. I do remember that. That was great. Okay, so we're going to move on and to a little bit of a sad segment, but hopefully happy in terms of remembering someone's great legacy. And this, Jonathan Demme passed away recently, and I wanted to do a tribute to his films. Jonathan Demme is one of these directors who, in some way, I think people had a hard time pinning down. Unlike a lot of auteurs out there who have a signature style or only worked in a certain genre or were known for one certain kind of film, Jonathan Demme did actually quite a big variety of films. Started off his films, as Brad and I were discussing earlier, doing his very first film he ever did was an exploitation movie.
Caged Heat.
Called Caged Heat, a woman's prison breakout movie with lots of nudity for Roger Corman. And then he kind of went from that to my favorite film of his, which is Melvin and Howard, 1980, which is a poignant dramedy. It's really a drama and comedy, and that's one thing about Demme. I think that's why he defied categorization a lot. He was actually someone who was known for making movies that didn't just fit easily into one category. Right. The exception of Silence of the Lambs, a lot of his films, like Melvin and Howard, are not really, it's not a drama, it's not a comedy, it's a character study. It's very funny in parts, it's very sad in other parts. Stars Jason Robards, there's a man, the character of Melvin, who is a gas station owner who picks up this guy on the side of the road, and the guy says, "I'm Howard Hughes." And he kind of goes with it and helps this guy along, played by Jason Robards. It's inspired by a true story. Supposedly true. Have you seen Melvin and Howard?
I saw it a long time ago.
Yeah, and it's one of my favorite films of Demme's. It shows the light touch he has with comedy, but you would never go from like Caged Heat and think, oh, this is guy that is going to make Melvin and Howard as his next movie. Of course, Caged Heat was more of a for-hire Roger Corman thing, but he's very interested in characters and in quirky people and kind of that Americana type thing. So after that, went on to Something Wild, 1986, which is one of my other favorites of his. I know it's one of Brian Knoll, who's a frequent guest on the show, one of his favorite films of all time, with Melanie Griffith and one of her greatest performances, and Jeff Daniels. And she plays this woman that literally kind of just takes Jeff Daniels on a ride and doesn't let go.
Kind of a pixie, yeah, crazy girl.
She's great, crazy girl, and leads this kind of like hapless guy down all these adventures. Sort of a road movie like Melvin and Howard, actually, but with great chemistry between the leads. And the movie's even, I think, out on Criterion Collection now. So really, obviously, he's just sort of building throughout the 80s, making these quirky kind of like comedy, drama type movies. And then...
Yeah, and I think when you talk about chemistry, then you lead into a movie like Silence of the Lambs, which was shot in 1991. That's like the all-time, one of my all-time favorite movies, with Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins having that cat and mouse game between them as Jodie Foster's trying to tease out information about a serial killer, and along with Scott Glenn, who plays her mentor. But
all the versions they've done of this movie, of these characters, taken Hannibal Lecter, even before Silence of the Lambs, of course there was Red Dragon and other ones, they've never captured, I think, that original chemistry that Demme was able to capture with Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins. And someone on Twitter recently posted, and I can't remember who it was, but it was one of the film critics I follow on Twitter, said that Silence of the Lambs is a perfectly directed movie, and I'd have to agree with that. There is not a missed shot in this whole movie. It's perfectly constructed, it's well directed, well acted, it's crisp, it just works all the way through, and that's pretty rare, actually, and especially for the fact that he came from a background of not doing big budget movies, and this is a big budget movie that he was given.
And I think he had something like 5 Academy Awards for that film.
Yeah, consecutive. It won won every major category, just about. So great film.
Right. And again, we follow on with the next film that we're talking about, Philadelphia, which was shot in 1993 and starred Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington. And again, you see in there Demme's ability to bring in actors who have great chemistry between them. And I was thinking about that as I was watching it again the other night. And as much as the film is about Hanks, who is an attorney who has AIDS, who sues for wrongful termination, it wasn't about AIDS, it wasn't about wrongful termination. A lot of the film for me was about conquering fear. How you conquer, how you have to take a subject and conquer the fear of that people or prejudices that they have against that. And to that end, it's as appropriate now as it was then.
And when I first saw, now the movie almost seems a little dated in some ways, because we obviously know more. It seems like, oh, this was that message movie about AIDS, but I remember seeing this. I was in high school when this movie came out, and I remember seeing it and just bawling. And that scene where Tom Hanks is playing the opera record, and Denzel is just watching him, and Denzel is such a great actor, and he doesn't say anything. He just watches Tom Hanks.
But you can see these transforming in that moment.
You can literally see him transforming on screen in front of you, and his perspective widening. And that moment was so powerful for me as 93, like a junior or sophomore in high school, wherever I was. I just remember I was bawling. It was so powerful and meant so much to me. He has these ways of getting these actors to give some of their best performances. This is sort of the movie that made Tom Hanks a real actor. This was the guy in the 80s who did Bachelor Party and The Money Pit, and all of a sudden now he's an Oscar. He had other ones too, but this is that period when people really started to take him seriously.
So going on, another aspect of Demme's work was documentaries. And we picked as an example of that was Neil Young's Heart of Gold, which was a film that Demme shot about a 2-day concert that Neil Young was shooting for his film Prairie Wind. And it's one of 3 films that I think Demme did for Neil Young, who also did other documentaries such as Jimmy Carter, Man from Plains. And it was a great story about, so Demme was a storyteller, and he was great at showing not only films like Philadelphia or Silence of the Lambs, but also telling stories about people's lives and their real life.
And he did like doing music, concert movies. You know, this is pretty much just a straight concert movie. He also did, of course, Talking Heads Stop Making Sense, which is a little less of a traditional concert movie. One of his last films he did before he died was the Justin Timberlake concert movie, which I don't know, you're going to go from Talking Heads, Neil Young, Justin Timberlake, you try to find a through line there. But and finally, 2008, this film was on my top 10 of the year, and it is a fantastic movie. And so this is another thing about Demme. Here's a director that stayed good from the 70s through the modern age. Not that many directors
over 30 years.
That. Yeah. Rachel Getting Married, which won huge acclaim and an Oscar nomination for Anne Hathaway as her portrayal of a drug-addicted woman who gets out of rehab for just a couple of days to attend her sister's wedding and wreaks havoc on the whole family while she's there. Another great example of that mixture of comedy and drama. There's some very funny scenes in this movie. There's some really horrifying, dramatic scenes, some very sad scenes in this movie. Rosemary DeWitt, this was the first film I saw her in. She's a great character actress who's in a ton of indie movies, but she's really good as the sister in this movie, and Deborah Winger is great in this movie. I love this movie, and it's one of Anne Hathaway's best performances she's given in her whole career. And again, he keeps drawing these actors out where they give some of the best performances I've ever done.
Absolutely. I just watched that today.
You just watched Rachel Getting Married. Oh, yeah, so you got to see it. I know. I was really hoping you'd get a chance to see it, but you like the movie?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it has an Altman-esque, Robert Altman type touch. It's a big cast with lots of sprawling characters intersecting. So anyway, to wrap up, Their Finest, we both agreed on. We give it 3 stars.
Right.
Lost City of Z, we both can recommend as a great adventure story. So we both gave that 3 stars.
Yeah.
Let's see. Night Shift. How many stars? 4 stars for you?
4.
4 stars for you. 3.5
Across
for
the board.
me. And but I did really enjoy it. And of course, our tribute to Jonathan Demme. I'd like to thank Brad for being on the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me, I should say. You can check us on our website at realfilmsnobs.com, on Facebook and on Twitter, and listen to us on KMUZ. I'd like to thank our fantastic crew and our wonderful sponsors for supporting the show. We wish you a great day and great movies.